The night was strangely quiet. A bright full moon hung high above the city, covering the streets in a pale silver glow. Most shops had already closed, the traffic had almost disappeared, and people were slowly returning to their homes. But that night was about to become the beginning of a story that would completely change one family's life. Our story begins with a young woman named Emma Suda. Emma had never had an easy life. She had gone through enough problems to understand that sometimes the only way to survive was to forget your troubles for a while. That night she was spending time with some people she knew. As the evening continued, Emma drank far more than she normally would. By the time she decided to leave, she could barely think clearly. Her vision was blurry, her steps were unsteady, and she could hardly remember where she was going. Somehow, she made her way into a building. But because she was drunk, she completely lost her sense of direction. She opened the wrong door, and that single mistake would change her life forever. Inside the room was a mysterious man named Eric Levin. Eric was not an ordinary man. From the outside, he appeared to be wealthy, powerful, and extremely cold. His expression rarely changed, and his eyes carried a strange intensity that made people uncomfortable whenever he looked directly at them. But there was something about Eric that Emma knew nothing about. He belonged to a secret werewolf bloodline. And on a night when the full moon was shining directly above the city, that secret was more dangerous than ever. Emma had no idea whose room she had entered. She barely knew what she was doing. All she knew was that she was exhausted and wanted somewhere to rest. The events of that night became a blur. There was the unfamiliar room, the mysterious man, the moonlight coming through the window. And then, morning arrived. When Emma woke up, she realized that she had made a terrible mistake. She immediately left the room. She wanted to forget everything that had happened. As far as she was concerned, it had been nothing more than one disastrous night. She never expected to see that man again. She certainly never imagined that one night would eventually lead to the birth of a child. A few weeks later, Emma began noticing strange changes in her body. At first, she tried to ignore them, but eventually she discovered the truth. She was pregnant. Emma was shocked. She didn't know what to do. The father of the child was a man she barely knew. She remembered his face, but she didn't know where he lived. She didn't know his family. She didn't know his background. And most importantly, she didn't know what kind of person he really was. Emma tried to find him, but Eric Levin seemed to have disappeared completely. There was no way for her to contact him. So Emma made a decision. She would raise the child by herself. Months passed. Eventually, Emma gave birth to a baby boy. She named him Ricky. From the moment Ricky was born, he became the center of Emma's world. He was a cheerful child with bright eyes and endless curiosity. He loved asking questions. He loved running around the house. And whenever he smiled at his mother, Emma felt that all the difficulties in her life were worth enduring. Ricky grew up without knowing who his father was. Emma never told him the truth. She couldn't explain that his father was a mysterious man she had met during one unforgettable night. She simply told Ricky that she would always be there for him. Years passed. 1 year. Then 2. Then 3. Eventually, Ricky turned 4. For a while, everything seemed normal. But after his 4th birthday, strange things began happening. At first, Emma thought they were harmless. Ricky sometimes seemed to hear things that nobody else could hear. He could detect sounds from surprisingly far away. He occasionally showed strength that seemed impossible for a child his age. But the strangest changes happened to his body. One day, Emma noticed something unusual about his hands. His fingernails were becoming longer and sharper. At first, Emma thought she was imagining it. She took Ricky's hand and looked closely. But there was no mistake. Something was changing inside her son. Ricky was frightened too. He didn't understand what was happening to him. He looked at his mother and asked what was wrong with him. Emma tried to comfort him, but deep inside she was terrified. She had no explanation. Then the situation became even stranger. Whenever the full moon appeared, Ricky's behavior changed. His body became unusually strong. His senses became sharper. And sometimes he seemed unable to control himself. The people around him began noticing the changes. At first they thought Ricky was sick. Some believed he had a rare medical condition. Others thought he needed psychological treatment. But as the strange incidents continued, fear began replacing logic. People started whispering. They began calling Ricky dangerous. Some even started calling him a monster. And once people became convinced that a 4-year-old child was a monster, there was almost nothing Emma could do to make them see him differently. Ricky was isolated. People became afraid to touch him. They watched him constantly. Eventually, they decided he needed to be locked away. The little boy couldn't understand why everyone was suddenly afraid of him. He didn't understand why people who used to smile at him were now looking at him with fear. All he knew was that he wanted his mother. He kept calling for Emma, and Emma was desperate to protect him. She tried to explain that Ricky wasn't dangerous. He was her son. He was only a child. Whatever was happening to his body, it wasn't his fault. But fear had already taken control of everyone around them. Nobody wanted to listen. Doctors were called. Ricky was examined. Tests were performed. But nothing made sense. There was no ordinary disease that could explain his condition. Every test only created more questions. Emma slowly began remembering the night 4 years earlier. The full moon. The strange room. The mysterious man. Eric. For years she had tried to forget him. But now she couldn't. She started wondering if there was a connection between Eric and Ricky's strange abilities. Could that man really be Ricky's father? And if he was, what exactly was he? Emma had no answers. But she knew one thing. She had to find him before it was too late. Then one night, Ricky completely lost control. His body began changing again. The people around him panicked. Some tried to restrain him. Others wanted to get rid of him. Emma immediately rushed toward her son. She didn't care how frightened everyone else was. She was his mother. She would not abandon him. Ricky was crying. He looked at his own hands and didn't understand what was happening. Then he looked at Emma with tears in his eyes. "Mom, am I really bad?" Those words broke Emma's heart. A 4-year-old child was asking whether he was a monster. Emma immediately pulled him into her arms. She told him that he wasn't bad. Whatever happened to his body, he was still her son. She promised she would protect him. But outside the room, the situation was getting worse. Several people moved toward Ricky. They believed he was too dangerous to remain free. Emma tried to stop them. But she was alone. She had no power against a group of frightened people. Then, a car suddenly stopped outside. Everyone became silent. The door opened. A man stepped out. He walked toward the building with calm, deliberate steps. There was something intimidating about his presence. People who saw him immediately became nervous. Nobody seemed willing to stand in his way. The man was Eric Levin. After 5 long years, he had returned. Emma didn't recognize him immediately. But when Eric looked directly at her, memories of that forgotten night suddenly came rushing back. The room, the moonlight, that mysterious man. Emma finally realized who he was. He was the man from that night. The man she had spent years trying to forget. But Eric wasn't looking at Emma. His eyes were fixed on Ricky. Something changed in his expression. For the first time, his cold face showed emotion. He looked at the little boy, as if he already knew exactly who he was. Ricky's father had finally returned. Eric slowly walked toward the child. Several people tried to stop him. But Eric didn't even slow down. His presence alone was enough to make them step back. Ricky was still frightened. Yet the moment Eric came close, something strange happened. The child became calm. Emma noticed it immediately. Why was Ricky so comfortable around a complete stranger? Eric knelt down in front of him. He looked into Ricky's eyes. Then he quietly said, "Don't be afraid." His voice was calm, but there was an unusual power behind it. Ricky stopped crying. Eric reached out and pulled the boy closer. And then something happened that left everyone speechless. Eric's own body began showing signs of transformation. His eyes changed. His expression became darker. His hands tightened. The atmosphere inside the room suddenly became terrifying. Emma stared at him in disbelief. And finally she understood. Ricky's condition wasn't an illness. It wasn't a normal disease. It was inherited. Ricky had inherited something from his father. Something supernatural. Something that ordinary people could never understand. Emma looked at Eric, the man she had met 5 years earlier. The man she had never been able to find. The man who had disappeared without explanation. And now he was standing in front of her, protecting her son. Then Eric revealed the truth. He was a werewolf. Not just an ordinary werewolf. He belonged to one of the most powerful werewolf bloodlines. A legendary lineage that had remained hidden from the human world for generations. Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. The stranger from that night was Ricky's father. And Ricky had inherited his father's supernatural blood. Suddenly, everything made sense. His strength, his heightened senses, his reaction to the full moon, his changing body. None of it was random. But another question immediately appeared. Why had Eric disappeared for 5 years? Why had he never searched for Emma? Why had he allowed her to raise Ricky alone? And why had he returned now? Eric looked at Ricky with a serious expression. It was obvious that he hadn't come back by accident. Something had brought him here. Something dangerous. Because Ricky wasn't simply another child from the werewolf bloodline. There was something unusual about him. Something that even Eric seemed concerned about. Emma still didn't know the full truth. She only knew that her son's life had suddenly become connected to a hidden world she had never known existed. A world filled with werewolves, ancient bloodlines, enemies, secrets, and supernatural power. And now she was standing right in the middle of it. But the biggest mystery was still waiting to be revealed. What really happened during that night 5 years ago? Why did Eric leave? Who was hunting Ricky? And why were people so afraid of a 4-year-old child? Most importantly, was Ricky simply the son of a legendary werewolf? Or was there something much more powerful hidden inside him? Emma was about to discover that the night she thought was nothing more than a drunken mistake had actually been the beginning of a destiny that would affect an entire supernatural bloodline. And Eric's return was only the beginning. Because the real danger had not even arrived yet. Eric stood in front of Ricky while everyone else remained frozen. Nobody dared to move. The atmosphere inside the room had completely changed. A few minutes earlier, everyone had been convinced that Ricky was a dangerous monster who needed to be restrained. Now they were staring at a man whose presence was even more frightening than the child they had been afraid of. Eric didn't shout. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply looked at them. And somehow that was enough. His eyes carried a strange authority. It was the kind of authority that came from someone who had never needed to prove his strength. Emma stood behind him, still trying to understand what was happening. She had spent years believing that the man from that night was simply someone she would never see again. Now she was learning that he wasn't human. And even more shocking, he was the father of her son. Eric slowly turned toward Emma. For several seconds, neither of them said anything. There were too many questions between them. Too many years. Too many things that had never been explained. Finally, Emma broke the silence. She asked him why he had come back. Eric didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Ricky. The little boy was still holding onto his mother. Eric's expression softened slightly. Then he said that he had come because he could feel the child's presence. Emma didn't understand. She asked what he meant. Eric explained that werewolves could sense members of their own bloodline. For years, he had been unable to locate Ricky. But as the boy's supernatural abilities began awakening, his presence became stronger. And eventually, Eric could sense him. That was how he found them. Emma stared at him. She couldn't believe that Eric had known Ricky existed all along. Then she asked the question that had been burning inside her for years. If you knew about him, why didn't you come? Eric remained silent. For the first time, his confidence seemed to disappear. He looked away. There was pain in his expression. But Emma didn't care about his excuses. She had raised Ricky alone. She had watched him grow up without a father. She had dealt with every illness, every difficult night, every problem. And now Eric had suddenly returned, as if nothing had happened. Emma was furious. She demanded an explanation. Eric finally admitted that he hadn't left because he didn't care. He had left because his world was dangerous. The werewolf clan he belonged to was involved in a conflict that had been going on for generations. His enemies were powerful, and if they discovered that he had a child with a human woman, they would use that child against him. Eric believed that staying away was the only way to keep Emma and Ricky safe. But that decision had consequences. He had protected them from one danger, while leaving them vulnerable to another. Emma didn't forgive him. Not immediately. She told him that he had no right to decide everything by himself. If Ricky was really his son, then he should have been there. Eric accepted her anger. He didn't argue. But before Emma could say anything else, a strange sound came from outside. Eric's expression suddenly changed. He looked toward the window. Emma noticed it. She asked what was wrong. Eric quietly told her that they weren't alone. Someone was watching them. Everyone became nervous. Eric moved toward the window. He looked outside. The street appeared empty. But Eric could sense something. A scent. A presence. Someone from the werewolf world had found them. And that person wasn't there to help. Eric immediately understood the danger. He told Emma to take Ricky and leave through the back entrance. Emma refused. She wanted to know what was happening. Eric told her there wasn't enough time to explain. Someone was coming. Then the lights suddenly went out. The entire building became dark. Ricky grabbed Emma's hand. Emma pulled him close. A few seconds later, they heard footsteps. Slow footsteps. Coming from the hallway. Everyone stopped breathing. Eric stood between the hallway and his family. His body became tense. He knew exactly who was approaching. Then a shadow appeared at the end of the corridor. A man stepped into the dim light. He looked calm, almost too calm. He smiled when he saw Eric. The man greeted him as if they were old friends. But Eric didn't return the greeting. His eyes became cold. The newcomer was a member of an opposing werewolf faction. He had been searching for Eric for a long time. And now he had finally found him. The stranger looked past Eric. His eyes landed on Ricky. Then he smiled again. That smile told Eric everything. The enemy hadn't come for him. He had come for the child. Eric immediately stepped forward. He warned the man not to come any closer. The stranger laughed. He said Eric had made a serious mistake by allowing his bloodline to continue through a human woman. He called Ricky an abomination. Emma heard the word and became furious. She stepped forward and told him not to call her son that. The stranger looked at her with contempt. He said humans had no idea what kind of creature they were protecting. Ricky wasn't an ordinary child. He carried the blood of an ancient werewolf lineage. But there was something even more unusual about him. The stranger said Ricky's blood was different. Special, potentially more powerful than Eric's. Emma didn't understand. Eric did. His expression became serious. He had suspected something like this. But he hadn't wanted to believe it. The enemy continued. He said that if Ricky's power awakened completely, the balance between the werewolf clans could change forever. That was why they needed to control him before it happened. Eric refused. He told the man that Ricky would never belong to them. The stranger smiled. Then he attacked. Everything happened in an instant. Eric moved faster than anyone could see. He blocked the attack before it reached Emma. The force of the impact sent furniture flying across the room. People screamed and ran away. Emma pulled Ricky behind her. Eric and the stranger faced each other. Neither of them looked human anymore. Their eyes had changed. Their strength had increased. And for the first time, Emma witnessed the true power of the werewolf world. Eric attacked first. He moved with incredible speed. The enemy barely managed to defend himself. They crashed through a table, then into the wall. The room shook from the force of their movements. Ricky watched in fear. He didn't understand why his father was fighting. But something inside him reacted to the battle. His heartbeat became faster. His hands began trembling. Emma noticed. She told him to stay calm. But Ricky couldn't. His eyes began changing. Eric suddenly sensed it. He stopped fighting for a moment. He looked at Ricky, and his expression changed. Ricky's transformation was beginning. Too early. Much too early. Eric immediately realized that the battle itself was triggering Ricky's power. If the boy completely transformed, nobody knew what would happen. Eric needed to end the fight quickly. He attacked with everything he had. The enemy was thrown backward. He crashed into the wall and fell to the floor. Eric stood over him. He warned him that if he ever came near Ricky again, there would be consequences. The enemy smiled. He wasn't afraid. Before disappearing into the darkness, he said something that left Eric deeply concerned. He told Eric that this was only the beginning. More people were coming, and they all wanted Ricky. Then he disappeared. The room became silent again. Eric immediately went to Ricky. The boy was shaking. His eyes were still partially changed. Emma held him tightly. She asked Eric what was happening to their son. Eric told her that Ricky's supernatural abilities had started awakening. But unlike ordinary werewolf children, Ricky's transformation was happening much earlier. That meant his bloodline was unusually strong. Emma asked if that meant Ricky was dangerous. Eric shook his head. He said Ricky wasn't dangerous because of his power. He would only become dangerous if someone forced him to lose control. Emma looked at her son. She realized that the people around Ricky had been doing exactly that. They had frightened him. They had isolated him. They had treated him like a monster. And their fear had been making his condition worse. Eric told Emma that Ricky needed to learn how to control his abilities. But there was another problem. They couldn't stay where they were. The enemy had already found them. If they remained there, more werewolves would arrive. Emma asked where they were supposed to go. Eric answered that there was only one place safe enough. His territory. Emma immediately refused. She didn't trust him. She told him she wouldn't take Ricky into the world of werewolves when she didn't even know what that world was. Eric understood, but he told her that staying would be far more dangerous. The people hunting Ricky would not stop. Emma looked at her son. She knew Eric was right. For the first time, she realized that the strange things happening to Ricky were much bigger than anything she could handle alone. She agreed to leave, but she made one condition. Eric would tell her the truth. Everything. No more secrets. No more disappearing. No more deciding what was best without asking her. Eric agreed. They left before dawn. Emma carried Ricky while Eric walked ahead. The journey took them away from the city and toward a remote area surrounded by forests. The deeper they went, the quieter everything became. Eventually, they reached a massive estate hidden behind thick trees. Emma stopped when she saw it. She couldn't believe anyone lived there. The property was enormous. Dark stone walls surrounded the estate. Large gates stood at the entrance. Everything about the place looked ancient. Eric told her that this was where his family had lived for generations. Emma looked around nervously. She could feel that something was different here. The moment they entered the estate, several people appeared. They were members of Eric's clan, and they weren't happy to see Emma. Some stared at her with suspicion. Others looked directly at Ricky. Their expressions changed the moment they sensed his blood. One elderly man stepped forward. He looked at Ricky carefully. Then his face became pale. He whispered that the prophecy was true. Emma heard the word. Prophecy. She immediately looked at Eric. Eric's expression became tense. He told the old man to stop. But Emma demanded to know what prophecy he was talking about. The old man hesitated. Then he said that generations ago, their ancestors had predicted the birth of a child who would carry a rare combination of blood. A child born from the union of a powerful werewolf and a human. A child whose power could either unite the werewolf clans or destroy them. Emma stared at Ricky. Her son was that child. The prophecy was about him. Eric had known. At least he had suspected it. And once again, Emma realized there were things Eric had never told her. She turned toward him. She asked how much he knew. Eric didn't answer. That silence was enough. Emma realized the truth was much bigger than she had imagined. Ricky wasn't simply a boy with supernatural abilities. He might be the most important werewolf child born in generations. And now every powerful clan would want him. Some would want to protect him. Others would want to control him. And some would want to kill him before his power awakened completely. Emma looked at Eric. For the first time, she understood why he had been so afraid. But she also understood something else. The danger was no longer outside their family. It had entered their lives. And there was no going back. That night, while Emma and Ricky were resting inside the estate, Eric stood alone outside under the moonlight. He looked toward the forest. He could sense something approaching. Another presence, stronger than the enemy from earlier. Eric's expression hardened. Someone much more powerful had entered his territory. And this time, they weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming for Ricky. Eric stood alone beneath the moonlight, staring toward the dark forest. The entire estate was quiet. Too quiet. He could feel a presence somewhere beyond the trees, but he couldn't identify it yet. Whatever was approaching was powerful enough to hide its scent. That alone made Eric nervous, because ordinary werewolves couldn't do that. Eric had spent years dealing with dangerous creatures, rival clans, and supernatural enemies. He knew the difference between a simple threat and a serious one. This was serious. He turned toward the mansion. Inside, Emma and Ricky were still asleep. For the first time in years, Ricky was somewhere his father could actually protect him. But Eric knew that protection might not be enough. The enemy had already discovered Ricky's existence. And once the secret was exposed, the entire werewolf world would eventually hear about it. Eric couldn't allow that to happen. He quietly walked back into the mansion. When he reached Ricky's room, he stopped at the doorway. The little boy was sleeping peacefully beside Emma. There was nothing frightening about him. He looked like any other 4-year-old child. But Eric knew what was hidden inside that small body. A powerful bloodline. A rare combination of human and werewolf blood. And possibly something even greater. Eric had spent years trying to understand the prophecy surrounding his family. He had always believed that the prophecy was exaggerated. A story created by ancient werewolves to frighten future generations. But after seeing Ricky's abilities, Eric could no longer dismiss it. The child really was different. And if the prophecy was correct, Ricky's awakening would change everything. Suddenly, Ricky moved in his sleep. His breathing became heavier. Eric immediately noticed. Ricky's fingers tightened. His eyes moved rapidly beneath his eyelids. Then he suddenly woke up. He looked around in confusion. Emma also woke up. She asked what was wrong. Ricky said he had heard someone calling his name. Eric immediately became alert. He asked Ricky what the voice sounded like. Ricky described a strange voice coming from the forest. A voice telling him to come outside. Emma became frightened. She told Ricky not to listen to it. Eric agreed. He knew this wasn't normal. Someone was trying to communicate with Ricky. And whoever it was had somehow managed to reach him despite the estate's protective barriers. Eric told Emma to stay inside. Then he went outside again. This time he wasn't alone. Several members of his clan followed him. They searched the surrounding forest. But they found nothing. No footprints. No scent. No signs of an intruder. It was as if nobody had been there. Yet Eric knew the voice had been real. Someone was testing the boundaries of his territory. Back inside, Emma sat beside Ricky. She could tell that her son was scared. She held his hand. Ricky asked why strange things kept happening to him. He wanted to know why people were afraid of him. Emma didn't know how to explain everything. She simply told him that there was nothing wrong with being different. She promised that she and his father would protect him. Ricky looked toward the door. Then he asked a question that surprised Emma. "Does Dad really love me?" Emma didn't know what to say. She looked at Eric standing outside the room. Eric had heard the question. For several seconds, he remained silent. Then he entered. He sat beside Ricky. The powerful werewolf who had frightened everyone earlier suddenly looked like an ordinary father who didn't know how to speak to his own child. He told Ricky that he loved him. He apologized for not being there before. Ricky asked why he had been gone. Eric explained that he had been trying to protect them. Ricky didn't fully understand, but he accepted the answer. He moved closer to Eric. For the first time, father and son embraced. Emma watched them quietly. She still had many reasons to be angry with Eric. But seeing Ricky finally have his father made her heart soften. However, their peaceful moment didn't last long. A loud alarm suddenly echoed through the estate. The protective barrier had been breached. Everyone immediately became alert. Eric stood up. His eyes changed. The clan members rushed into position. Emma pulled Ricky behind her. Eric told everyone to stay inside. Then he went outside. This time the enemy didn't hide. A group of werewolves appeared at the edge of the forest. There were many of them. At least a dozen. They weren't from Eric's clan. Their leader stepped forward. He introduced himself as a representative of an ancient rival bloodline. Eric recognized him immediately. This was someone far more powerful than the attacker from earlier. The leader demanded that Eric hand over Ricky. Eric refused. The man said that Ricky was not Eric's personal property. The child belonged to the werewolf bloodline. Eric replied that Ricky was his son. The rival leader laughed. He said that was exactly why Ricky was dangerous. A child carrying two bloodlines could destabilize the entire supernatural world. Eric told him to leave. The leader refused. Then he revealed something that Eric hadn't expected. The prophecy had been discovered by other clans. They all knew about Ricky now. And they were coming. Eric realized the situation was much worse than he thought. This wasn't one enemy. It was becoming a war. The rival leader gave Eric one final warning. Hand over Ricky peacefully, or the estate would be destroyed. Eric didn't hesitate. He told him to try. The rival leader smiled. Then the battle began. Werewolves charged from every direction. Eric's clan attacked them immediately. The forest erupted into chaos. Howls echoed through the night. Trees shook as bodies collided. Eric fought at the front line. He moved with incredible speed, taking down enemy after enemy. But there were too many. Emma watched from inside the mansion. She could hear the fighting outside. Ricky became frightened again. His supernatural energy began rising. Emma tried to calm him. But Ricky could feel his father's danger. He wanted to help. Emma told him he couldn't go outside. Ricky insisted. He said his father needed him. Emma held him tightly. She told him that Eric had specifically asked them to stay inside. But Ricky's body had already started changing. His eyes turned bright. His hands began trembling. A strange energy surrounded him. Emma became terrified. She called for Eric. But Eric was still fighting outside. The rival leader noticed the change. He looked toward the mansion. His expression immediately changed. He could sense Ricky's awakening. He ordered his men to stop fighting Eric and attack the mansion. Eric heard the command. His heart dropped. He knew exactly what they wanted. Ricky! Eric fought his way through the attackers. But he couldn't reach the mansion quickly enough. Several enemies had already entered the building. Emma grabbed Ricky and tried to escape through a hidden passage. But the passage was blocked. They were trapped. The enemies moved closer. Emma stood between them and her son. She was terrified, but she refused to move. One of the attackers told her that if she handed over Ricky, she would be allowed to live. Emma refused. She told them they would have to kill her first. The attacker raised his hand. Before he could strike, a powerful force threw him across the room. Eric had arrived. He stood between Emma and the attackers. His face was completely different now. There was no hesitation, no restraint, only rage. He transformed. His werewolf form was far more powerful than anything Emma had seen before. The attackers stepped back. Even they were afraid. Eric attacked. One after another, the enemies fell. But the rival leader had entered the mansion as well. He stood at the end of the hallway. He looked at Eric and smiled. He said that Eric couldn't protect Ricky forever. Then he revealed the real purpose of the attack. They weren't trying to kill Ricky. They wanted to awaken him. Eric's expression changed. The enemy explained that Ricky's power could only be fully activated under extreme emotional pressure. Fear, anger, pain. The more terrified Ricky became, the stronger his supernatural energy would grow. The rival clan wanted to force that awakening. If Ricky lost control, they could potentially manipulate him. Eric immediately understood the plan. He rushed toward Ricky, but the rival leader released a powerful supernatural wave. Eric was thrown backward. Emma screamed. Ricky watched his father fall. Something inside the boy snapped. His eyes changed completely. A strange howl came from his throat. The entire mansion shook. Everyone froze. Ricky's supernatural energy exploded outward. Windows shattered. Furniture moved. The floor cracked beneath his feet. Emma couldn't believe what she was seeing. Ricky was only 4 years old. Yet the power coming from him was enormous. Even the rival leader looked surprised. He had expected Ricky to awaken, but he hadn't expected this level of power. Eric slowly stood up. He looked at his son, and for the first time, he was genuinely afraid. Not of Ricky, but of what the boy might become if he lost control. Ricky looked around. He couldn't recognize anyone. His emotions had taken over. He was no longer simply a frightened child. His werewolf instincts were taking control. Emma slowly approached him. Eric told her to stop. He warned her that Ricky might attack without knowing who she was. But Emma refused to listen. She walked toward her son. Ricky growled. His eyes locked onto her. Everyone held their breath. Emma kept walking. She told Ricky that she was his mother. She reminded him of the things they had done together. The nights she had stayed beside him when he was sick. The mornings when they ate breakfast together. The little games they played. The stories she told him before bed. She told him he wasn't a monster. He was Ricky, her son. Ricky's expression slowly changed. The rage in his eyes began to disappear. His breathing became calmer. The transformation started to weaken. Then he collapsed into Emma's arms. Emma held him tightly. Eric watched silently. The rival leader looked furious. His plan had failed. But he hadn't lost everything. Before leaving, he told Eric that the real battle hadn't even begun. The clans were coming, and they would not stop until Ricky was under their control. Then he disappeared into the night. The surviving enemies followed him. The estate became silent again. But everyone knew this was only temporary. Eric walked toward Emma and Ricky. He looked at his son. Ricky was unconscious. His body had returned to normal. Eric carefully picked him up. Emma looked at Eric. She asked whether Ricky was going to be okay. Eric said that he would recover. But then he admitted something important. Ricky's awakening had happened much earlier than expected. And that meant they had less time than they thought. Emma asked how much time they had. Eric didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said that before the next full moon, Ricky needed to learn how to control his power. Otherwise, the transformation could become permanent. Emma was shocked. She asked what would happen if Ricky couldn't control it. Eric looked at her. He said that Ricky could lose his human side. He could become trapped in his werewolf instincts. Emma refused to accept that possibility. She said they would find a way. Eric agreed. But there was another problem. The prophecy. The old clan members had gathered in the main hall. They told Eric that Ricky's awakening had been detected by every major werewolf clan. Soon, the entire supernatural world would know where he was. Eric needed to make a decision. Either hide Ricky and risk being hunted forever, or bring him before the ancient council and ask for protection. Emma didn't trust the council. Neither did Eric. He knew some members wanted Ricky protected. Others wanted to control him. And a few wanted him dead. So Eric decided to do something dangerous. He would take Ricky away from the estate. Somewhere even the werewolf clans couldn't easily find him. Emma asked where they could go. Eric said there was one place. A place connected to his family's oldest secret. A hidden sanctuary deep inside the mountains. According to legend, no werewolf could enter that place unless they carried the blood of the original lineage. And Ricky carried that blood. But there was a reason the sanctuary had been abandoned. Something had happened there generations ago. Something that even Eric didn't fully understand. Emma looked at her sleeping son. She knew they had no choice. If they stayed, the enemies would keep coming. If they left, they would have to enter an unknown world. But one thing was certain. Their ordinary life was over. The next morning, Eric prepared to leave. Emma packed only the essentials. Ricky was still sleeping. As they prepared to leave the estate, Eric stopped. He looked back at his home. Something felt wrong. He could sense another presence nearby. But this time, it wasn't coming from the forest. It was coming from inside the estate. Eric's eyes narrowed. Someone had betrayed them. Someone inside his own clan had secretly contacted the enemy. And if that person had revealed their destination, then the sanctuary would no longer be safe. Eric turned toward Emma. He told her they had to leave immediately. Emma asked why. Eric simply said, "Because someone here already knows where we're going." And as they walked away from the estate, a mysterious figure watched them from an upper window. The figure held a small object in his hand. A communication device. He whispered a single sentence. "They are heading to the sanctuary." Then he smiled. The hunt had begun again. The little boy was sleeping peacefully beside Emma. There was nothing frightening about him. He looked like any other 4-year-old child. But Eric knew what was hidden inside that small body. A powerful bloodline. A rare combination of human and werewolf blood. And possibly something even greater. Eric had spent years trying to understand the prophecy surrounding his family. He had always believed that the prophecy was exaggerated. A story created by ancient werewolves to frighten future generations. But after seeing Ricky's abilities, Eric could no longer dismiss it. The child really was different. And if the prophecy was correct, Ricky's awakening would change everything. Suddenly, Ricky moved in his sleep. His breathing became heavier. Eric immediately noticed. Ricky's fingers tightened. His eyes moved rapidly beneath his eyelids. Then he suddenly woke up. He looked around in confusion. Emma also woke up. She asked what was wrong. Ricky said he had heard someone calling his name. Eric immediately became alert. He asked Ricky what the voice sounded like. Ricky described a strange voice coming from the forest. A voice telling him to come outside. Emma became frightened. She told Ricky not to listen to it. Eric agreed. He knew this wasn't normal. Someone was trying to communicate with Ricky. And whoever it was had somehow managed to reach him despite the estate's protective barriers. Eric told Emma to stay inside. Then he went outside again. This time he wasn't alone. Several members of his clan followed him. They searched the surrounding forest. But they found nothing. No footprints. No scent. No signs of an intruder. It was as if nobody had been there. Yet Eric knew the voice had been real. Someone was testing the boundaries of his territory. Back inside, Emma sat beside Ricky. She could tell that her son was scared. She held his hand. Ricky asked why strange things kept happening to him. He wanted to know why people were afraid of him. Emma didn't know how to explain everything. She simply told him that there was nothing wrong with being different. She promised that she and his father would protect him. Ricky looked toward the door. Then he asked a question that surprised Emma. "Does Dad really love me?" Emma didn't know what to say. She looked at Eric standing outside the room. Eric had heard the question. For several seconds, he remained silent. Then he entered. He sat beside Ricky. The powerful werewolf who had frightened everyone earlier suddenly looked like an ordinary father who didn't know how to speak to his own child. He told Ricky that he loved him. He apologized for not being there before. Ricky asked why he had been gone. Eric explained that he had been trying to protect them. Ricky didn't fully understand, but he accepted the answer. He moved closer to Eric. For the first time, father and son embraced. Emma watched them quietly. She still had many reasons to be angry with Eric. But seeing Ricky finally have his father made her heart soften. However, their peaceful moment didn't last long. A loud alarm suddenly echoed through the estate. The protective barrier had been breached. Everyone immediately became alert. Eric stood up. His eyes changed. The clan members rushed into position. Emma pulled Ricky behind her. Eric told everyone to stay inside. Then he went outside. This time the enemy didn't hide. A group of werewolves appeared at the edge of the forest. There were many of them. At least a dozen. They weren't from Eric's clan. Their leader stepped forward. He introduced himself as a representative of an ancient rival bloodline. Eric recognized him immediately. This was someone far more powerful than the attacker from earlier. The leader demanded that Eric hand over Ricky. Eric refused. The man said that Ricky was not Eric's personal property. The child belonged to the werewolf bloodline. Eric replied that Ricky was his son. The rival leader laughed. He said that was exactly why Ricky was dangerous. A child carrying two bloodlines could destabilize the entire supernatural world. Eric told him to leave. The leader refused. Then he revealed something that Eric hadn't expected. The prophecy had been discovered by other clans. They all knew about Ricky now. And they were coming. Eric realized the situation was much worse than he thought. This wasn't one enemy. It was becoming a war. The rival leader gave Eric one final warning. Hand over Ricky peacefully, or the estate would be destroyed. Eric didn't hesitate. He told him to try. The rival leader smiled. Then the battle began. Werewolves charged from every direction. Eric's clan attacked them immediately. The forest erupted into chaos. Howls echoed through the night. Trees shook as bodies collided. Eric fought at the front line. He moved with incredible speed, taking down enemy after enemy. But there were too many. Emma watched from inside the mansion. She could hear the fighting outside. Ricky became frightened again. His supernatural energy began rising. Emma tried to calm him, but Ricky could feel his father's danger. He wanted to help. Emma told him he couldn't go outside. Ricky insisted. He said his father needed him. Emma held him tightly. She told him that Eric had specifically asked them to stay inside. But Ricky's body had already started changing. His eyes turned bright. His hands began trembling. A strange energy surrounded him. Emma became terrified. She called for Eric. But Eric was still fighting outside. The rival leader noticed the change. He looked toward the mansion. His expression immediately changed. He could sense Ricky's awakening. He ordered his men to stop fighting Eric and attack the mansion. Eric heard the command. His heart dropped. He knew exactly what they wanted. Ricky! Eric fought his way through the attackers. But he couldn't reach the mansion quickly enough. Several enemies